And that was at IBM Watson Health, and I was the SVP and CTO there for a company called, Watson Vital. And but then I became a, CIO, Chief Information Officer, and this is when I transitioned from the technology roadmap to more the business administration and really the business type of strategies and making sure that all dots align properly to move the organization in a certain direction that makes financially sense and is sustainable, right? And then on top of it, you put things like regulatory compliance, security, HIPAA compliance, and what have you, and really making sure that the organization is set on a path, collectively speaking, of sustainability and competitiveness, right? Having a competitive advantage and really leveraging technology to compete effectively in the marketplace. And I think this is a big difference between like a CIO and a CTO, right? And even a chief architect. A chief architect aligns the different systems and architectures. A CTO produces the product technology roadmap and strategies on the technology side of it. And a CIO is really heavily based on the business side. And, for that, I got my executive MBA, I got my doctorate in business and all sorts of things to really make sure that that particular part of the CIO is very, very strong. Because when I first started out, as I mentioned, I was a coder. I was really strong in coding. And that helped me a lot to become a chief architect. And it was still beneficial as a CTO, although I started seeing that it was less where I spend my time. I spend more of my time on the roadmaps and things like this, right? But coding was not beneficial at all on the CIO side. The moment I moved in the CIO side, it was merely about managing. I mean, one budget was $62 million. Another one was $900 million, P&L responsibility. That's a lot of money. And so you need to make sure that you really know what you're doing in terms of business and managing. At some point I managed up to 1,600 employees across, 2 different continents. And when you do that, you're going to have to make sure that you're very strong on the business side too. So for me to, 2 things had to happen. I actually realized that I had a gap on the business side, which one of my former bosses and friend today it was pointing out to me is like, oh, well, you're kind of weak on that. And I'm one of those guys who hates to lose, right? And I think there's a big difference between being a good loser and knowing how to lose or hating to lose. And I hate to lose. And the moment I realized I have this gap on the business side, that's when I went back to school, got my executive MBA, got my doctorate, just kept on going. And to be honest with you, the doctor was like, I really wanted to go into the research of business, right? So not just doing the executive MBA when you read the articles that the doctors in business write, but I actually wanted to, research and specifically technology innovation and what makes people tick when it comes to technology innovation, right? And a lot of my, studies and research on that topic also had to do with the difference between CTOs and CIOs, and we can get into that in a couple of minutes from now. But I think, a lot of people that I meet and that I coach today, and I coach people that want to become CIOs and how to level up and really moving in that, right? There's a gap that a lot of people that come from the technology side have, which is the business side. So they have to, what I call, they have to learn the language of business. And that's critical. And that is more than just going through an Excel spreadsheet and looking at some budget numbers and making it all somewhat count up and add up, right? You really have to understand the main activities that give you the competitive advantage from your strategic point of view, right? And then really start scaling and these activities and making sure you keep the cost of revenue low from an operations point of view, and innovate quickly enough and things like this, right? So innovation really needs to be accelerated and things like that. And what are the business barriers that stand in the way of innovation and competitiveness, right? And as a CIO, the job is to remove these barriers. And the job is then also building, lasting relationships and partnerships with vendors out there and what have you, to really make sure that the organization, is on a sustainable path. And we all know that nobody can do everything themselves anymore these days. We really have to build strong partnerships, right? And so most CIOs that I meet, unfortunately, they're a little bit weak on the business side because oftentimes they come from this technology side and they feel like there's this natural progression from a career point of view where you go developer, architect, CTO, maybe even some manager and director in between, and then CTO, and then CIO. But that's no longer the natural progression. There's more and more companies, technology companies, they hire CIOs that come from a completely different domain. They might not even have a strong technology background. And it turns out that these CIOs have a very strong business background, and they're extremely beneficial to operations. Now, from a culture point of view, and what that does, right, and it kind of disrupts a few things here and there, that is often also by design, right? But so from my point of view, that was somewhat of a natural progression, but I had to work really hard for this, and I had to realize that I had a gap, and I, fixed that gap. And today, a lot of people tell me I'm still very strong in technology, and I can dive in really deep with the engineers if we have to, which is not a good sign if a CIO has to dive in really deep with his engineers, right? You don't want to do that. But sometimes you have to, and they have to prove to you that they did the homework, so to speak, right? And all I'm really looking for is for opportunities to kind of steer the ship, like a little joystick, to kind of steer that ship a little bit without being misconstrued as a micromanager. You don't want to do that either, right? But yeah, that somewhat for me was how things kind of happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned this business acumen, the understanding of the business, how important it is, the higher you are in this corporate ladder. And a lot of the people who also I've been working with, they are really strong with their technical skills. And then when it comes to explaining the P&L, they really struggle because they haven't really been thought about it. And you embarked on this executive MBA journey, which for a lot of people is maybe too pricey. So do you know of some other alternatives that CTOs or aspiring CTOs can walk to actually fill this knowledge gap?
Yeah, and a little word of caution here. I think there's a lot of content on YouTube these days. There's a lot of free courses out there. And oftentimes it sounds like those presenters know what they're talking about, but then they actually never really managed millions of dollars. They never really managed a business. They never managed employees and really, developing employees and these kind of things, right? And managing roadmaps and strategies. Many of the, sources that you find online, you got to be very careful about. And oftentimes one of the indicators is that they all somewhat talk about the same stuff. And it's always like they all read the same 5 to 10 books, and then they all talk about the same thing. And it's usually very high level. And one of the things that I like to do, I like to go in really deep, right? I call it the trenches, right? Because I'm still a CIO in the trenches. And so I think there are some free, certificates out there you can get. Look at MIT, look at Harvard. Those are really good sources. They're good sources because they are put together by, knowledge carriers that actually produce new knowledge and have a special method to capture that knowledge. I call them the PhDs and what have you. And they're usually pretty good. But you also want to put this in comparison with some mentor. You want to find somebody, a coach, a guide, a mentor, some advisor that is in the trenches, and you kind of combine it a little bit. I always say I didn't get to the C-suite by myself. There was always a mentor and a coach that, removed roadblocks or helped me to remove roadblocks from my own career, to help me put together a playbook for my career, right? Which is what I'm doing today with my level up system. I got this playbook, and like within 3 to 6 weeks, I get you an actual blueprint of your next career and every step you need to be taking in order to make it to the C-suite. And so that's what I had, and as every time I progressed, every time I kind of moved, forward, and I wouldn't call it necessarily upward, because once you're in the C-suite, you're in the C-suite. For me, it's moving more forward, right? And once you move forward, you need different type of people that get you there. And there's nothing better than finding somebody who currently is a CIO or is a CTO or a chief architect to actually get you there. They know exactly what it takes, right? Versus, somebody who just hasn't been there, but is only book smart. So I think you want to find somebody, some sources, some online training. Be careful with the LinkedIn training. I'm not a big fan of LinkedIn training. I, watched a few courses out there, and unfortunately, a lot of the LinkedIn training is not by the ones from the trenches. Usually just by, somebody who read a book somewhere, and they'll kind of talk about the same stuff. But if you really want to level up, and if you really want to take action that doesn't ruin your career, because you got to be careful too who you listen to and what you actually do. But you want to really move forward quite quickly. And it doesn't take that long to get in the C-suite, right? If you're a CTO today to become a CIO, that could be only a year away, a year. But getting there and not failing in the first 15 months, that's a whole different ballgame. And so you want to be, look out for sources online and these courses and what have you that can give you the certificates, that can give you the degrees, even if you get your executive MBA or your MBA, even especially if you do it online. Yes, you got a piece of paper, but it doesn't mean, and the piece of paper opens the doors and you might get in, but it doesn't mean you're going to succeed, right? And that's getting in the C-suite, becoming a CIO, but then actually succeeding as a CIO. It's night and day. It's a completely different ballgame. You're gonna need different type of help once you're in to actually make it, especially past 15 months, right? A lot of CIOs that I see these days, they're like under 2 years, and and it depends on your appetite for risk and what you do, and how far you want to stick your neck out there and take on bold bets, which is what the organization hired you to do, right? But if you're very inexperienced, you usually don't set boundaries, strategic boundaries and things like this, and you say yes to everything that comes your way. And if you never say no, then the expectation from the CEO would be, oh yeah, I told Oliver, he never said no, he's going to do all these things, right? And before you know it, 6 months into it, you're in firestorm hell, so to speak. You're just back-to-back meetings. You work 60 hours a week, you work on the weekends, and you're going to start burning out. And most important than that, you're going to start burning out your team. And then you're probably going to, do that for another 6 months. Now you're 1 year in, and it's unsustainable. You start gaining weight, you start burning out, you don't go to the gym anymore. And then another 6 months, which is now a year and a half, you're going to fail. They're going to replace you, or you're going to look for a new job. It's just unsustainable at that point. And you really haven't left any room for yourself. I call it margin. No margin to actually work on a strategy and plan your way forward instead of executing your way forward. And it's a trap that a lot of newcomers in the C-suite get themselves into. And so the way you get out of it is to get somebody like me. I get you out of it, or make sure you never end up there in the first place, which is very important to give you that playbook, so to speak, right? Yeah.
It must be really overwhelming now when I imagine these $900 million that you have been responsible for. I mean, 1,500 employees to have in the department. I mean, how can someone even get ready for an adventure such as this one? Of course, you don't jump from managing 20 people to 1,200, but how to go from being a CTO who runs a department of 50 or 70 people to someone who is a CIO in a larger company? Like, is there any typical path, or how should people just start applying for CIO jobs, or what do they do?
So for me personally, it's not so much about the structure. I think if you know how to set up the structure of being a CTO or a CIO, right, and you set up this structure, that means you know how to hire right. Hire people that are smarter than yourself, and hire people you can trust, and there's psychological safety and things like this, right? And people are not in burnout. But so if you have a certain structure in place by which you lead the organization, then whether it's a mid-sized, small, or a big organization, that doesn't matter, because the problems are pretty much the same. What is different is two things. It's the scale of the problem that's different, and it's the velocity in which you execute. When you have, a smaller company, even though for the small company, a small problem might still appear big, but in the greater scheme of things and the budget around it, whatever, it's a smaller problem. But the structure doesn't change. The way you solve the problem, the way you position the solution and the solutions through strategic thinking and things like that, that is still the same, and you do the same type of work in a big organization. What is different, though, is that the big organizations, because there's so many more people involved in this and many more departments, and there's in a large organization like IBM, where I was, or Intuit, both are Fortune 50 companies, there are, these departments, even sometimes they're in different countries, right? So there's many more things you have to consider. So the execution takes longer. The strategy realization takes longer. And it's critical to develop this self-regulated type of, pace, almost patience to some degree, right? Especially when you come from a smaller company to a big one, that usually can be very discouraging, because when you come from a smaller company and you execute faster, especially if you were the developer, like a software engineer on the same company, and they promote you to CTO, you're already so used to doing everything yourself. The worst thing you can do is to continue to do everything yourself. Now you can execute faster, and the CEO might like it for some time, but usually the strategy suffers, right? But when you go in a big company, I was not even getting close to the code, right? I developed something called Watson Care Manager and some other applications out there, and I haven't even seen the code, right? There were like 3, 4 layers down in other countries, whether it was, Ireland or Detroit or Dallas or in China or Malaysia, wherever the code was written, was all over the place. And so my job was, as I said, as an SVP, and was to manage these resources, make sure that they align at the right time, that the right people get together to then start manifesting this strategy and what have you that goes out there, right? But it's the velocity that's different. It's the velocity and scale that is different. That's it basically in a nutshell. Now I was lucky for me personally, I was in startups, small, mid-sized companies, and a couple of Fortune, 50 companies. And so I've seen, all of these, including a family-based business. I was the CIO for Chen Medical Centers, ChenMed, which is a wonderful family, and they did a great job. They have hundreds or more than 100 medical centers now, and they're making a huge difference in the world for a lot of patients. And so that was also great, right? Because now you get involved as a CIO in something where you have a personal, reward that you get out of that, which is like the satisfaction of helping a lot of people. But that's a side topic. So I think as I said, I think if you have a good structure and a good techniques, which by the way you can learn getting your executive MBA. That's when you learn these kind of techniques. This is when you learn how things come together, right? I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin, and I teach one class for the executive MBA today. It's the information technology and international business, right? And so there are techniques you learn. Those are tools you put on your tool belt as a CTO on how to control the pace and the scale, with that structure that you learned. And there's a clear distinction and a difference between somebody who has the education on how to manage, right, and lead, versus somebody who figured it out over time. They're not the same, and you can tell quite quickly, where that there's a difference, right? And oftentimes the ones that I've seen that either have a lot of experience, like 20 some years, and then they kind of figured it out. They failed so many times, which is actually not a bad thing necessarily, right, from a career development point of view, but they failed so many times that they learn so much because they actually learn from it. Some people fail, they don't learn anything from it. They just repeat the same, patterns of failure over and over again. But assuming you learn from it, right, you do that. But the reason I got the executive MBA from a business point of view and my doctorate in business, I didn't want to fail as often. I still fail here and there, tiny things here and there, right? But it's the structure, the actual techniques, the processes, and how to connect the dots that you get from an executive MBA. And it's really underrated these days. And it's amazing for me too to hear myself talk that way, because I became CIO without an MBA, right? And I didn't even finish my undergraduate, until like 10 years ago. And I started my undergraduate I think in 1996 when I came here to the United States from Germany. And I just started coding away. And then 3 years into it, I just, I got married and I met a wonderful wife, and I just didn't finish my undergraduate for many years. But I became chief architect at Silicon Valley for Intuit, CTO for Marshfield Clinic, CIO for GenMed, SVP for IBM Watson Health, and so on and so on, all without a degree. And this is, people gave me a shot, and they trusted me and they mentored me and what have you. And I was willing to learn quite quickly. But there was always this pressure of lingering over me. I always felt like a pretender. I always felt like I'm just faking it, right? Here and there. And really where it hit me was I was sitting in Yorktown at the Yorktown Research Center for IBM, where Watson was invented. And I was sitting there with the people that invented Watson, right? And the IBM cloud and other things. And I was sitting there in this tiny room, and I was sitting there with those double, triple PhDs and everything else like that. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I hope they don't figure out that I'm just faking it. You know, it's like the imposter syndrome, right? And even though people always told me, no, no, you're fine. No, you know all the stuff. So you've done it, right? But that's when it hit me. This is when I signed up and I said, I'm going to finish my undergraduate. I kept on going, got my executive MBA, kept on going, got my doctor in business. And boy, am I glad I did it. And you're right, it was a lot of money. But the good news is if you do your education, you know, after you had a career, you already have the money and just paid cash for it and it was done, right? So you don't end up with, big expensive student loans, which wouldn't be good. So again, it's one of those things where later on I did my education and I got so much more out of it as a result too. So it has helped me personally tremendously to then actually succeed more than fail as an executive leader. Really, really, really important. And I just have become a big fan. I used to walk around too and tell people, you don't need a degree. Don't worry about it. Just start coding. Just start doing that. It will happen. Somebody's going to promote you and you will have it. And it does happen. All right. But when it happens, you pay the price of stress. Because when you have the imposter syndrome and you kind of just made it in and now you have to prove yourself, and then you're competing unofficially, you're competing, and I don't know, I'm a very competitive guy. I always compete a little bit, but you're unofficially competing with the ones that have the degrees, and it's just something you start doing, right? It's really weird, and that's a lot of pressure, and that's not good. That created more high levels of stress and things like this, and then you deal with other issues, right? And so that's not good. So my advice to anyone is, fall in love with your profession and love what you're doing. Connect with people who are already where you want to be next. That is critical. A lot of people don't know how to do that, especially in technology. There's a lot of introverts, and but even introverts can be very successful in building relationships with people in the C-suite and what have you. They just need to trust that it's going to be okay. And the reason it's okay is because everybody in the C-suite, people like me, this is how we got there. We got there by building relationships with people that are in the C-suite, and then they gave us a shot. So we totally understand that, right? Which is a great way to also never have to really apply for a job again if you build these kind of relationships and maintain them also, right? But yeah.
It's actually really so refreshing when you talk about the degrees with such an excitement, because a lot of people in IT, they want to skip it or they just go through some quick boot camps because it's so easy, or it was easy 2 years ago to get a job in the tech industry as a developer. And then, once you are there, kind of who cares about the degree? But now I kind of understand, and hopefully our listeners also understand how important it is for the higher positions. So once you get to the C-suite or even directors or VPs of engineering, it's really good to have this foundation, right? Because you will be competing with people who have it from the past, and it's much more important.
Absolutely. And especially in the era of artificial intelligence, right? I'm big in AI. I've been in for about 9 years now, ever since my time with Watson. And I can tell you that in the era of AI, and there's a great author called Mike Walsh. He's a futurist. He's got a book called The Algorithmic Leader, which I recommend everyone should really get. And having education is actually what sets us apart down the road again. Once that AI hype is over, and once AI is the foundation, it's part of our everyday life and what have you, right? I think there's a lot of what's going to happen. You see the onsets of that already today, where it's a great productivity tool and people use AI. But the thing with AI is everybody uses AI, they all kind of sound the same. Have you ever noticed in content when you look at LinkedIn, people post on LinkedIn, let's say somebody says, write me a social media post on burnout and give me 3 action steps on how to get over it. They all say exactly the same, and they're all wrong, by the way, because you can't fix burnout by taking a break. It's laughable from a research point of view. So it's like they're all the same, right? And what sets somebody with knowledge aside, apart is actually connecting things in a way that creates new knowledge, connecting things in a way that hasn't necessarily been done before or not done at a certain scale before. And AI doesn't know that, at least not yet, right? Unless we move to general AI at some point, it might be a different ballgame. But we're not there yet. And I think in the era of AI, even though, you might think that, oh, all the knowledge is just on the phone. I could just start talking with ChatGPT and it tells me everything, I need to know. Although that is true, but it's almost like watching a Netflix movie, right? It kind of, by the time you're done binge watching a Netflix series, you don't even know what the first episode was all about. It goes in here, it goes out there. It's just, quickly, but you really don't know it. You don't have the knowledge. And I think we owe it, especially in leadership, we owe it to the employees that we develop them, right? And that by the time they move on, that they are a better version of themselves than what they were when they started working for us, right? And this is something I'm very proud of. Everybody that works for me, by the time they're done, they're moving on or whatever, or I move on, I want everybody to be a better version of themselves than they were before we have met. And that can most of the time, that really relies on how well-rounded you are in terms of knowledge. And again, getting these degrees is not just about getting a lot of knowledge and then doing something with it. These degrees is about how to accumulate knowledge, how to process new knowledge, and how to turn new knowledge into something actionable. And actionable in a way that doesn't destroy the business. Actionable in a way that actually increases profitability, competitiveness, and things like that. That is what these degrees really do. And employers know it too. They know it. And make no mistake about it, I had hundreds of coders that work for me all over the world, and I hired them, because they had the right skills, right? The right skills. They could code immediately, and certain, products needed to get out of the door and what have you. But if you want to get promoted, just doing the work, just doing the coding, and just, working, 5 years on just, doing as you've been told, that's not going to get you promoted. If you really want to get promoted, you have to participate differently in the organization. You have to connect on the strategic level, on the knowledge level. You have to start really paying attention to the inner workings of the business and how the engine actually executes and how the money actually flows through the organization. And you can do this. You can learn this from any position you have in the organization, including the mailroom, including being outside and greeting people, visitors in the hospital, and moving them to the waiting rooms. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have learned how to learn, how to accumulate knowledge, and how to process knowledge, which is what you learn in college, how to process knowledge, doesn't matter where you start in the organization. You are poised to level up. Sooner or later, you're going to level up because you have no other option but to participate in the dialogue, like the discourse, the dialogue you have with people you meet in the hallway. And let's say you are an entry-level position in a hospital, and then the CEO walks by and you say, and after a couple of years, you know them, and says, hey, Frank, how's it going? Oh, by the way, I really like that. I really like the numbers that we just published in the news article. Looks like our press Gainey score is like top notch, right? If you make a comment like that, you're going to stand out. And if you make 20 of those comments, every month to somebody, what have you, before you know it, somebody will seek your presence. And they will say, we got to get Oliver to the room. He knows. I know he knows because I talked to him, in the hallway. And that's how you get your seat at the table. And this is how I got my seat at the table, by just showing genuine interest and really, really, paying attention to what's happening. But anyway, so I'm a big fan of degrees today. As I said, I never thought I would say that. 10 years ago, I would have told you almost the opposite. I would have told you it's like, degrees, don't need them. Just start coding, build your SaaS platform, get some financing, and then sell the company for $100 million like everybody else on YouTube these days. If it would be that easy, everybody would do it, right? So, but yeah, as a CIO, you are really, you owe it to the organization, to everybody in the organization, that you know exactly what it is you're doing. You don't wing it. You know what you're doing, and you have a process of processing and digesting knowledge, and you have a process by which you go about asking for help. You have a process by which you go about strategizing and managing and operations. And administering everything. There are processes that are taught, in college, or some MIT courses and some other free Harvard courses. Some of them cover some of these things as well. The only problem is with those free courses that are out there, how do you know what else you need, right? I know there's a CTO course, I think by Harvard or somebody has a CTO certificate. You can get this as a chief technology officer. And I know two people that actually did that, and they are not ready to be CIOs. So it gives them a baseline, in terms of how to succeed more as a CTO, but it's still not a jumping board to become a CIO, not even that particular one. So again, because it's not as well-rounded like an executive MBA, which is so well-rounded, right? Or doctor business. I mean, you dive in really deep when you do a doctor, right? You pick a topic and you get really good. For me, it was technology innovation.
Awesome. Well, some people may think this is an advertisement for an executive MBA, which it is not, but I just feel so tempted to enroll.
Yeah.
which we are not advertising it, but we both are really excited about it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
thinking of opportunities, you mentioned that just being present and asking questions and being active also opened you some of the new doors with people within the organization, and then they invited you to join the room. What would you do or suggest for others if you wanted to change from one company to another? Like how to get a job as the CTO or CIO these days? What are the best ways from your experience?
So it's a two-part answer. The first part is, how do you even find out about these confidential searches out there? And I found a great way that works almost flawlessly how to find that out. You don't even have to call, at least at the beginning, like an executive recruiter. You can find out about these retained searches, right? And once you have found your search tool, now you have to have a certain readiness to actually go to the other company, right? And that goes back to researching the company. You really want to, again, when you start looking to switch companies, the only way they're going to hire into a leadership position with budget responsibilities is if day one you are up and running in a way that doesn't do damage, right? Now, it might take you time to meet everybody and memorize the names and what have you and understand the inner workings and some processes, but at least you know enough about the organization to not do harm, right? Which is very important. So how do you do that? Well, you have to research the company. You have to start building relationships with the decision makers in the company. You can do this way before you ever get a job, right? I do that all the time to just build these relationships, which means you have something in common, right? Not just a phone number in the address book, but really building, healthy relationships and maintaining that too. I have a whole list, a Google Sheet, where I got like a couple of hundred of these, people that I just over the years I've just maintained it, and I'm pinging them, monthly, every 3 months, 6 months, once a year, some of them, right? And again, it's just something that's important to me, and what I do. Plus, it's easy when we meet so many people these days to forget them. I don't want to forget anyone. I think they're all important, and they're just great human beings. And so you really want to make sure that you understand the company. When you come in and you start interviewing, it's really not they interviewing you. It's really you somewhat selecting them. And this is also important. You want to make sure that when you start looking for a company, that you select that company, you choose that company, right? Because when you're an officer in a company, you have a fiduciary duty, you got all sorts of, things that come with it, responsibilities. And you want to make sure that you're in a spot where you are absolutely needed right now, where the timing is perfect, and you kind of analyzed your direct team already way before you take the job. You already know who's reporting to you. You know your peers already, and you kind of come in that you're somewhat already part of the ELT. You're somewhat part of the team already. That's the best way to come in. It's also a great way to actually get the job also, right? When everybody feels like you're part of the team already, which is throughout these interviews, it's more like, yeah, we just had some conversation with Oliver, and we went for 2 hours, local Starbucks, and we had some coffee or whatever it is, and we just started, brainstorming about strategic objectives already and things like this. And the moment you start doing that, you kind of show that you're already a fit, right? It's really about fit. Now, the other thing I just mentioned is, how do you find out that you actually have a job, right? And I use a tool called LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and I actually have that open. Do you mind if I share real quick?
Yeah, please, please.
Yeah, let me just share. I don't know if, yeah, there we go. I just want to show your your viewers this. So this is something called LinkedIn Sales Navigator. It's not the, Premier edition, the premium edition, and it's not the recruiting edition. It's its own thing. I think it's like $90 a month or something like that. And there's this little button here called Changed Jobs. So you basically narrow it down based on what you're looking for, company type, things like that. There's now this new thing with persona. You want to look for the decision makers. And I want to find the people that the past job, their previous job is the one that I want. And now you're gonna get what I'm doing, right? Okay, I want to find out. So I found 22 people who have been in the current role for a month or two, and they used to be chief information officers before. So all you really got to do, click on their profile and see where they were previously, and then call up, human resources first. Try the main line, right? Says, hey, and you can always fake it. You go say, hey, I heard from whatever that you have a sensitive search going on to replace your CIO, and you have the name of the previous CIO also. You say, hey, I'm calling for the replacement for Mark Anderson, who left not too long ago. Who's leading your search right now? And then usually they tell you, well, it's an executive firm we have, or hiring managers, whatever. Great, can you get me in contact with them? And then, sooner or later, you get in contact with them, and then you tell them, it's like, hey, Nancy from Company X just told me to call you and about the position, and she wants me to send you my information and to get in the race here for this replacement, for the CIO. So it's one of the things that works like 90% out of the time. It's absolutely incredible. A lot of my clients already use that. And I had some clients that were looking for a job for 10 months looking for a job. And then after they found out this, 6 weeks down the road, they had some really meaningful interviews. And then, 3 months, they had their job offer, which was, quite amazing. But yeah, it used to be this big secret. It's like, only retained searchers and executive recruiters know where those searches are. But now you kind of just look at the data. I'm a little bit of a data guy. Again, it comes from doing my doctorate, right? Everything is data for me. So I look at data. It's like, just, see what the data says, right? But it's one of the things that I thought I share. And I think it works really well for anyone out there, who is actually looking to find these confidential searches. That's one way to do it. It's called social engineering, right? So you collect your data, you social engineer into it or penetrate that company. And again, LinkedIn will tell you exactly who the decision makers are. So if you need to know, like who's the chief human resource officer or hiring manager, what have you, you can find it through LinkedIn. And there's another tool called SalesQL. It's free, salesql.com. It's a plugin for LinkedIn. That tool you can use to get somebody's direct email address and mobile number if you really want to, call them right away and these kind of things. And which sometimes works also depending how aggressive you want to be.
Right.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to leadership, right? If even finding a job in the C-suite requires that you look at your affairs as from a leadership point of view, right? And I told somebody else that I'm coaching not too long ago, I said, your number one, like, what is your job right now? My job is to find a job. Exactly, that's your job. But it's more than a job. It's your company. So run it as a business. So what would you do when you get started? Well, you build a team around you. You have a product, which is you, and you define your market, which now you find out the top 5, 10, 15 companies. You research the heck out of them, and you do a bottom-up analysis, and you go in, basically applying all of these, processes you learn in college. Again, there it is, right? You apply all of this methodical thinking and these techniques to find yourself a job. And it's, but you have to lead first. If you just send out resumes and you just shotgun it, good luck with that. That doesn't work anymore. Anyone that I talk to that's just shotgunning it with resumes and try to have a killer resume, forget that. Those times are over after AI came out. AI can produce a resume for you in about 15 seconds. And it looks pretty darn good too. And so you really can't compete on a resume anymore. Maybe you just have a blank page in the middle that says, hire me. Maybe that's a better resume. I'm just joking, right? But it's, the game has changed. And, but it's critical when you hire somebody, how they found you, how they go about getting hired and everything, that tells you a lot about their readiness as a leader. How do they lead themselves? How do they lead their own affairs? How do they find solutions for themselves? It all starts there, right? And that nicely translates to something in the professional world, right?
Very interesting. With these tools, it's unbelievable. Now it's just so easy to connect with anyone around the world, figure out when people leave jobs or start new jobs, get contact details. It's
Yeah,
unbelievable, really. And now we
it's
have access.
unbelievable. And they're all posting about it too. How often you see on LinkedIn, congratulate Oliver for starting a new position as a CIO. It's like, there's on LinkedIn, boom, there it is, right? And all you got to do is look at where they came from. It's kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah. And
it's
it's
kind of,
likely that, yeah,
I know,
the other company will need replacement. So true.
absolutely. And it doesn't take that long to replace them, right? Now, sometimes what happens is somebody left 6 months ago, but they never changed it on LinkedIn. And
Yeah.
then they just started getting a job. Now they changed it, but it's actually 8 months ago when they left the other company. But what's the worst thing that can happen? The company tells you, yeah, we replaced Michael
Mhm.
already 6 months ago. Right? Oh, okay. Now at least you got a phone number from somebody who knows the stuff, and you already on the mind now. And then you tell them, hey, do you mind if just nevertheless sending my information just in case, right?
Yeah.
And then you follow up with them. I will put them on my Excel spreadsheet or my Google sheet, and I just follow up with them, right? Build your network that way.
Mm.
But it goes back to the principles of good leadership, right? It's can't lead without good methods and techniques and knowledge, and because everybody else depends on it.
Mm.
I think that's the big difference from being a coder and plugging myself in with headphones and listening to some techno, trash, some dance floor music, whatever it was back in the late '90s. I was like just in my zone, constantly coding, and um, that's one thing. But I had no other responsibilities but the code I'm creating, and I was an artist, so to speak, right? Code as an artist, but later on, it became about the responsibility for the business and all the other employees. And that's the big difference. And not everybody can take it. I think being in the C-suite, being a CIO is not easy. A lot of people think that, oh, if I would be in charge and I'm the CIO, life is so much easier. Forget that, my friend. It's planning and strategizing is very, very hard work, right? And the responsibility you have, you better be excited about this because if it ends up being a burden for you, it's going to burn you out. And being responsible for people's livelihoods and their families and everything and their dreams and everything that they're doing, um, you need to be able to live with that. You need to be able to make decisions that sometimes, means you have to let go of people. It's very hard, very hard. But it also means you need to promote the right people for the right reasons. You need to build them up and things like this, right? And not everybody's going to like those decisions. And there's always some people that just don't agree with the way you decided. And you gotta have to find a way to be okay with that. And there are ways and methods to learn how to be okay with it in a way that you sleep 8 hours through the night, right? But if
Mhm.
you wake up during 3:30 in the morning at devil's hour, and because you regret sending an email or the way you responded, or you read your emails from your sent items, you read it over and over again, you know something is wrong. And usually it means you just can't take the pressure. You just you're quite not there yet. You don't have the right methods to deal with that kind of exposure, political exposure and just a general exposure from a leadership point of view. Right?
And speaking of these methods, there is one interesting thing that you mentioned a while ago. It was the strategic thinking that you learned during the executive MBA. So that's probably my last question, just to be mindful of your time. But there is so much interesting stuff that you mentioned, and I don't want this one to slip through the cracks. So what exactly did you mean by the strategic thinking? Like, is it something that people can learn on their own? Well, like, is it something of course, it was involved in the executive MBA, but what exactly to look for?
Yeah, I mean, anybody can learn anything on their own if they take the time. It just depends on how fast you want to get to it, right? And if you learn something on your own, you have to make mistakes to learn from it, and it might take you five years or more, 10 years, or a lifetime sometimes, right? But if you get your executive MBA, you'll learn it in 15 months or whatever it is. And so strategic thinking starts with data collection, right? And so it's not just sitting down and agreeing what the plan should be, because strategy and plan are not the same, right? Like a plan has milestones and assignments to resources and things like that, and it has a budget and things like that. That is a plan. But plans usually come after the initiatives, after the strategies, right? So strategic thinking is where you collect data and you know how to interpret the data, and you look for ways to compete effectively, right? That's what strategy is all about. It's just the word strategy itself is about competing, competitively, like effectively in the marketplace, almost unfairly. That's what strategy is all about, right? And a lot of people don't understand that, but they think a strategy is a plan. A strategy is, let's just discuss what we're going to do next, and then we're going to do it. That's not strategic thinking. That's planning and doing. Strategic thinking is looking at how the market behaves, looking at market trends that are coming in, looking at what's possible the way from a history point of view, what we've done so far, where we need to go next, what are the other things that need to change as part of the strategic execution in order for us to actually attain that strategic outcome that we want to have. Be very clear. I call it strategic clarity, right? Promote strategic clarity as you start embarking on the journey of strategic thinking. Make sure everybody's clear on what the strategic objectives are, and then aligning the entire organization to making that happen. So you can't just do it with one plan, right? You have to align many people and way people look at the world, how they solve problems, how they respond to challenges in the marketplace, how to respond to challenges internally and things like this. Who are we as people, when we solve problems, right? That's a big part of that as well. And so that is strategic thinking. And again, it can be acquired over some time, and especially when you're part of great companies that do this very naturally. Google is a great company. They think very strategically, right? And it takes a long time for Google to change something, right? But when it changes everywhere, right? Not just one tiny thing. But some companies they don't know how to do this. They build one new product, but it's not really tied to a bigger, broader strategy, right? So, but it can be learned. So if you are really interested